Good evening, everyone. I'm Thomas Bivens with the LP Mises Caucus. Tonight, our series of Ask Me Anythings with the LP presidential candidates continues with Dan, Taxation, and Theft Behrman. So is it like a Tribe Called Quest, Dan? Do you say the whole thing?
Sometimes. Usually just when I introduce myself for the first time. Otherwise, I just go by Dan.
Okay. So how we're going to do this one, just because of technical difficulties, is we've got the thread in the group, so please post your questions in the thread. In the meantime, I'll be going through some questions that we've developed in the XCOM and just running through those in the meantime. So, to get started, what is Austrian economics and why is it important to incorporate it in the branding of a presidential race?
That's a great question. So I would say I learned a lot about the Austrian theories from Ron Paul, and that was kind of my introduction to that. I actually, while this is important, and I do like to push the ideas of ending the Fed and getting off of fiat currency, or at least creating a free market of alternative currencies, I try to stay away from the ins and outs of economics itself and really push the positives of these philosophies. Because most people, most voters, and I think this is a big problem that the Libertarian Party has had, is they don't care too much about the details of how economics work. They want to know what's in it for me. And this is why we see, Bernie Sanders is having such great success, because people are like, oh, I'm going to get healthcare, I'm going to get this, or Andrew Yang's UBI. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get $1,000. They don't care about how it works. What they're more interested in is what's their benefit. So when I talk about economics to most of the people that I teach this to, I start out just with the very basic, look, you're going to get a much lower cost of living, a much lower cost of goods, and a bigger paycheck. So you're going to have more money in your pocket, and it's going to go further. And this is really how I connect with a lot of voters who are starting to, they're already listening to the socialism, and they're listening to the Republicans, on printing money and everything else. And this is how I bring those people back into this idea of the libertarian philosophy and the Austrian economics.
Okay, so let's talk about another aspect of libertarian philosophy. One of the major planks of libertarianism, although some might disagree, is the non-aggression principle. So, in regards to the non-aggression principle, what do you see as the relationship between the NAP and property, and can the two be separated?
Yeah, I mean, I think between the NAP and property, I think we need to respect property rights. It's interesting because there's a lot of case law that says not only is tangible property your property, but your labor is your property, your time is your property, your money is your property. These are all your property, and you have an unalienable right to contract your property in exchange for other people. So I think, when we look at the government and all of its policies, pretty much every single policy it has that tells us how we're allowed to spend our money or use our property is a violation of the NAP. So I think, they're both very, they can be very well connected. And ultimately, we do need to protect property rights as a very fundamental idea. And this is why I push the idea that taxation is theft so much, because if we don't own the fruits of our labor, if we don't own the money that we've earned and the entire paycheck that we've contracted our labor for, if we don't have those basic property rights and the government is taking that property away from us, how are we supposed to be able to protect our property at all if we can't even protect that basic property?
Okay, so let me follow that up with, do you consider intellectual property a form of property? Because government certainly does. So do you see any commonality? Do you see, an artistic work, or I'm in tech, so you can have things like engineering specs that are considered intellectual property, and there are libertarians who kind of fight about this. What's your
Right.
view on this, and how would you approach it?
So I think, the idea that government should protect it is kind of where we get off from the reality of what intellectual property is. When we talk about, if you've got a movie company that's making billions of dollars and they're worried about someone copying their movie, this is not something that's got anything to do with me. So why am I paying taxes to hire the FBI to go around looking for people who are copying these movies to protect this billion-dollar corporation and their profits? While we should say that, yeah, okay, that type of copying is harming them to some degree, I shouldn't have to pay for it. You shouldn't have to pay for it. The taxpayer shouldn't have to pay for it. As a business owner, when you create property, whether even if it's a store, when you have a store selling tangible goods, if it's a clothing store, you recognize that to some degree, people are going to walk into that store and they're going to figure out some way to get some product out without paying for it, stealing, right? And you factor that into your cost of operations. You factor that in with security. You pay for security cameras. You pay for the tags that are going to set the alarms off. These are security systems that you pay for. You don't make your customers pay for that, or you don't make the customers of the next store shop pay for that. You include that in the price of your cost of doing business and in your price of your product. And of course, you want to get that cost down as low as possible, but it's your responsibility ultimately. And if you catch some people doing it, maybe you can sue them for damages or whatever you may do. But it's your responsibility. And when we look at intellectual property, that same method is really still there. It's up to the companies to minimize that, and they can use this with digital copyright prevention systems like DRM and encryption and everything else. But ultimately, it's their responsibility. And a lot of this can even be enforced by contract. A lot of IP laws we talk about are patents. When you create something and you want to sell this idea to somebody, the idea of a patent is there to protect you so that no one's going to steal your idea and you can be the first to market. But if you're signing NDAs with anybody that you present this idea to, you can protect that with a contract without needing special government regulations and laws and rules and everything to handle that. And I think that's really important. We can look at, how can we achieve the same results of IP protection through voluntary contracts? And then that eliminates the question of how should government get involved, and how should government create these arbitrary laws that are going to force everybody to play by these rules, even the people who disagree with it.
Okay. So building on that a little bit, why is political decentralization important, and how do you plan to how are you incorporating it in your campaign?
Sure. So decentralization centralization is basically a monopoly. And monopolies are all protected to some degree with the use of force. When we look at even private corporations that have monopolies, those are usually done through government regulations. So we need to get rid of that, and we need to allow a free market to thrive without, in an environment where anybody can compete. And this is very important when we talk about decentralization, because people need to have these options. And I like to push these ideas in pretty much every aspect of the platform. So, for example, one of our big platform items is healthcare, and what are we going to do about healthcare? And the FDA, I'm sure everybody knows, is a monopoly on the approval of certain medical procedures and medicines and pharmaceuticals. The FDA should not have a monopoly. If I want to buy a drug that is not FDA approved, but it's maybe approved by some other agency, I should be able to buy that. It's kind of like the right to use experimental drugs, and all these other questions that have come up in the past. But it's my right to decide whether or not I want to use this. And when we do that, what we'll see is if other private organizations start to appear that say, hey, we're going to certify that a drug is okay, they're going to stake their reputation on how well they prevent bad drugs getting to market that are harmful or dangerous, or drugs that are marketed without showing. Maybe there are very dangerous drugs that are going to be marketed and approved by these organizations, but it's going to be for terminal illnesses where people have almost no choice left, and they want to take that risk. They're going to die in a couple of months unless they take this. It might kill them. It might extend their life by a couple of years. That's up to the individual to decide. And when you take the monopoly power away from the FDA to decide what drugs you're allowed to use, we're going to see a lot more innovation. We're going to see a lot more new treatments come out, and we're going to see a lot more new cures and advancements in science, technology, and medicine in so many different ways we can't even imagine right now.
Okay, and you would extend this to not just the drugs, but the entire healthcare system?
Absolutely. I mean, we have doctors who are here from other countries who have been certified in those countries, but they're not able to practice medicine here because they don't match certain criteria, or the government has a de facto monopoly on who is able to practice medicine, and a finite number of doctors who are allowed to be certified every year. We need to get rid of that system. If the AMA or or Congress wants to pass rules on what it requires for you to become a doctor, I don't really like that, but fine, let them make their rules, as long as you have a private organization that's allowed to be created by doctors and medical professionals who can say, we're going to certify these doctors to practice medicine, and we have nothing to do with the government. We're not part of that monopoly. And when we create that power, the cost of our healthcare is going to go down so much that we have this big fight over how we're going to pay for all this healthcare for millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, but we don't look at the actual price. If we get the price to come down to where nobody even is worried about buying insurance, you can afford all of your medication and all of your healthcare just by walking into the doctor and paying cash. That's a much better system for everybody. And that's absolutely possible if you get these monopoly powers away from the government and allow people to practice in the free market.
Yeah, I know here in North Carolina, we're actually one of the states that actually has certificate of need laws, and that is really making it difficult to deliver healthcare, particularly to people, because we're a big state, delivering healthcare to people in the more remote areas of the state. And so and of course, you have people who actually want to provide a certain service, know how to do it. They're nurses. They know how to do a certain procedure. They know how to do this. They have the equipment, but they physically can't do it. Otherwise, they're breaking the law. It has to be either signed
Right.
off by a physician, or the physician has to be present because of those. It's it's a regulatory mess, and the higher up the chain you go, it goes worse. I mean, Obamacare was, if you know anybody who works in healthcare, and I was actually working at a hospital at the time, it was a practical earthquake. There are people who lost their jobs because of Obamacare. Absolutely, for certain, without question. But I could
Yeah.
rant about that all day, but but yeah, so that I think that's interesting, that is that approach to healthcare. So just to kind of push back on that same health, just to dig into that healthcare thing a little bit more. What do you say to someone who kind of gives the response they gave to Ron Paul, where, oh, you just want people to die if they can't afford this procedure. You want them to, they need some special medicine. They need,
Right.
don't you care about poor sick people?
Right. And so the theory is that the government and the politicians care about us, and that's why they have all these laws in place, which ultimately make things more expensive. But what I usually ask them is okay, we have in this country, you can have insulin, right? And you can have one dose of insulin can cost $100 to purchase in the United States, that's manufactured here in the United States. You can go down to Mexico and you can buy that same insulin that is manufactured in the United States and exported to Mexico for $25. It is illegal for you to order online and have that insulin shipped back to the United States. Why is that? Is that really because these import rules are there for your safety, to protect you against this insulin that might be of lower quality from another country? No, because it came from the United States. So why are these laws all here in the first place? And it's there for one reason. It's to protect profits. They know they can't sell insulin for $100 in Mexico, so they sell it for $25 there. And then they lobby Congress to make sure that we cannot import cheaper drugs from other countries so that we are forced to pay higher prices. This is the government system that we're trusting to take care of us and make sure that we're not sick and dying in the streets. But this is what the system does. It makes our healthcare more expensive. It's not, I mean, it is, greedy monopolistic corporations, absolutely. But the only reason that they have that power over us is government regulation. There are 3 companies allowed to sell insulin in the United States. There are 47 companies that manufacture it worldwide. You go to any other country, you have more than 3 choices, and the prices are much, much lower. But in the United States, you've only got 3, and the prices are much higher. And that's it, because you have absolutely no choice. That's your right to choose from different manufacturers, and that right is what drives the price down and makes it more affordable for everybody. So, when we look at this free market solution, we have to understand we haven't had a free market in the United States in a very long time, and that's why the prices are so high. And we can look at other countries and see that the prices are much lower. Let's forget about these socialistic systems about, stealing from one person to pay a high price, because you're still getting these really high profit margins for these 1%, corporations that everybody loves to talk about that shouldn't be making all this money. When you talk about socialized healthcare, that's all you're doing. You're helping to bump up their profits, because you're just going to be stealing from more people who are working, who are healthy, to help other people pay for their medication, and you're helping those profits go up. But if you get rid of those protections on those profits, you will see the profits come way down, the cost of healthcare come way down, and the sick people who need that medicine can afford that medicine and so much more. And we're not even talking about just medicine here. Like I said, we're talking about new innovations and new cures to actually cure these diseases. That are going to come to market. And I mean, that's going to save you so much money, and it's going to make you so much healthier. What's not to like about that system?
Okay, really good answer. Let's switch over to branding for a second. So first of all, I'm looking at one of the first question that we got here. I just want to make it clear. All right. So getting to David Dull's question, first I wanted to ask, is it true that you actually, so this is my question first to kind of lead into his. Is it true that you actually changed your name? Like your name legally now is Dan Taxation is Steph Behrman.
So there's an interesting difference between legally changing your name and lawfully changing your name. I have changed it lawfully by declaration, because free men don't ask for permission. I'm not going to go to the government and say, excuse me, masters, please, may I call myself something else? No, it's not their name. So I changed my name by declaration, and that is lawfully legal for me to do. And so this is my name, and this is how it is appearing on, so far, I think 3 or 4 primary ballots. So it's the government is recognizing it, even though I haven't petitioned them and updated, the names on my passport, etc.
So do you know if North Carolina is one of those states?
Yes, I believe North Carolina does have my middle name as Taxation is Theft
So,
on the
okay.
primary,
So when I walk
and
into that,
California too.
okay, well, I mean, I kind of expect them to be weird like that, but so when I walk into that booth in March for the North Carolina primary, and all you North Carolina meat cogs, please vote in our primary. It's not binding, but we do need to send a signal. But I don't want to get into that too much. But the point is, when I do see those names, and it will appear as Dan Taxation is That's Behrman. Okay, that's pretty
That's
funny. I
that's what
I
I understand. Yeah.
okay. So let's but getting into Dan's question from that. Now you mentioned that you lawfully changed your name, and that was an interesting answer. But also the hat. Now, not that hat that you're wearing, but the bigger hat. That
This one.
yes, yes, yes. Now now we're talking about branding. So why did you feel the need to lawfully change your name and wear the hat? And do you think that hurts the credibility of the LP at large and well, first of all, do you think it hurts the credit? Why don't you believe that it hurts your credibility, and why do you believe that it doesn't hurt the credibility of other libertarian candidates that might
Sure.
run?
So The reason I started hammering this message so hard is in in 2016, after Gary Johnson got the nomination. I was planning to support him, even though I knew he didn't believe taxation is theft. He liked the fair tax, and all of that considered, even though he wasn't my candidate of choice, I was still planning to support him. But then he gave his victory speech, and in his speech, he's rallying the troops. He says, taxation is theft, and everybody cheers for him. And when I saw that, that was kind of like something inside me snapped, because I was like, but wait, you don't believe that. You're just pandering to this audience. Um, and I really took offense to that. And so I started going around, asking everybody in the audience, because he won by a very small margin. I think he got 51%, which got him the nomination. And I just started asking everybody, is taxation theft? And I got one of two answers. One was yes, and the other was, it, for some reason, always started out with, well, and then some version of no. I don't know why it all starts with that well, but but then what I asked is, who did you vote for? And it turns out all the people who did not believe that taxation is theft are the ones who voted for Gary Johnson. And to me, that is to not believe that, that taxation is theft is to not believe in the non-aggression principle. It's to not believe in some of the core values of libertarianism. So at the 2018 convention, when I came back, I wanted to make sure that this message was branded across the entire convention as much as I possibly could. So I got a table. I was already selling T-shirts that said taxation is theft, and hats and everything else. And this was really my motivation to make this happen. And I was just looking for the perfect way, to just one up myself. And this hat was the best thing that I could find. So I went with this, and it had such an amazing response at the convention, that I decided I'm gonna keep this going as part of the brand for a while. Now, to the point of does this hurt the libertarian brand? I think absolutely it does not. What it does is, and I've worn this all kinds of places in public, and I've started conversations with people who completely disagree with it. It is a great tool for starting those conversations. It is a pattern interrupt. When people are flipping channels or they're flipping YouTube and they see something that jumps out at them, like this hat or the words taxation is theft, it gets them to stop and click and say, what the hell is this? And when the things that you say that follow that up are actually making a lot of sense, then even to somebody who completely disagrees. I mean, I've had conversations with socialists and Democrats and all these people who are absolutely. I've had people tell me, well, I love paying my taxes. And a lot of libertarians will use that as a point to start a fight. Well, you're a communist, you're a state, they'll start throwing all these insults out instead of saying, let's have a conversation. And when you take that and turn it into a constructive conversation, you actually can get these socialists and communists and the very far left on our side. And it's very amazing to see. But the most important part of this is that it's not the words taxation is theft that create a fight with somebody. It's how you handle their response. And when you start talking about things like, well, do you agree with how our tax money is spent bombing other countries, invading other countries, things like that? That's when you get the far left to say, well, no. And then they'll start coming up with things like, well, yeah, I agree. The voters should be able to decide where the money is spent. Well, now you're bringing them a little bit more closer to the idea that taxation is theft. And you're not going to convert them in a 5-minute conversation, but you're planting seeds and you're getting them to think about what really is taxes, what really is taxation, and what power are you giving up as an individual, as a voter, as a constituent of any country, as a citizen. What power are you giving up when you just blindly give your money to these politicians through taxation and let them figure out how much they're going to take and how to spend it? And that's very powerful.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer. So, uh, building on that, how you mentioned a little bit in your answer about how it would help, how the hat and the name and all of that is not a detriment to you, but I would like you to go into a little bit about about the down ticket candidates, because every libertarian candidate for president gets this answer every go around. How are you going to help the down ticket candidates?
Right. So in 2016, I actually had some experience with this because I was working on the McAfee campaign, and they started this program called Vote Different, which was actually, I was the webmaster who set up dozens of websites for down ballot candidates. I'm calling them cross ballot candidates now because I'd like to see everyone treated as equals, but we're already starting to form these partnerships. We have people running for state house, mayor, all across the country, US Congress, and we're partnering. And so what we're going to do once we get further into the election is we're going to create their websites. We're going to make sure they have a great web presence. We're going to help them with coming up with their platform, making sure they have great photos, the things that just the little things that a lot of the cross ballot candidates kind of miss out on. We're going to make sure that they have a great social media strategy. We're going to teach them how to fundraise and how to use that money for social media advertising. Paid advertising online is very, very inexpensive, and you can reach a very specific audience. That's amazing. Now, on top of this, what we're going to do is we're going to share the cost, and we're going to share the volunteers. And so when we start doing door knocking, we're going to make sure that if we have 2 or 3 candidates in an overlapping district, we're going to make sure those 3 candidates are all on one flyer or one door hanger. And we're going to get all 3 of the candidates volunteers together and make sure that they're all door knocking at the same time. So now you've got 3 times as many people giving out 3 times as many door hangers, talking to 3 times as many people about 3 candidates, not just one. And not only does that mean we get a further reach, it actually gives more credibility, because to a lot of people who have never heard of a libertarian before and they get a flyer and it says, oh, here's one person running in a party that I've never heard of, it's now, oh, here's one person running for Congress in my district, one person running for president, and one person running for mayor, and I can vote for all 3 of them. This actually sounds like there's an entire party that's getting their program together. This could be interesting. Let me see what their policies and platform is about. So we're going to help in so many different ways in sharing the costs and creating that credibility. And ultimately, what we have to understand is the reason the Democrats and Republicans are winning and have been winning for so long is they're literally billion-dollar brands. They're just like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And in order for libertarians to get to that point, we have to create a brand, and we have to get that brand in front of millions of people, and they have to see it multiple times. We have to use the same type of advertising and techniques before we become what appears to be a billion-dollar brand like the others. But we have to figure out a way that we can do that without actually spending $1 billion, because of course, libertarians don't raise as much.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Had a few technical difficulties for a minute, but we are back online with Dan Behrman. So Dan, Dan, taxation is theft, Behrman. So Dan, could you repeat what you said before you cut out there?
Yes. So basically, I was talking about how we're going to work with the cross ballot candidates, and we're going to create a synergy that allows us to work more efficiently and to create a better brand reputation overall for the Libertarian Party. Because ultimately, that's what we're up against. We're up against billion-dollar brands, and we need to be able to take that on, of course, for a fraction of the price. And we have fewer resources to work with, so it's very important that we work together as efficiently as possible.
Okay, got another question here from Thomas Quitter. When life gives us lemons, we make lemonade. What happens when government gives us free stuff? Do we thrive or flounder?
Right. That's a great question. So a lot of people think if the government gives us free stuff, things are going to be great. And it's very difficult to tell people, hey, you've got a free thing and we want to take that away from you, right? And that's kind of what the Libertarian Party message has been for a while is, oh, you're receiving Social Security or you're receiving food stamps. We want to take all that away from you. We need to understand that, this is people are in survival mode. And when they're in survival mode, a lot of the rules about morality and everything go out the window, right? If they're feeling threatened that you're going to take a program away and that's going to cost them their livelihood, that's very dangerous. So instead, what you have to do is you have to offer them a better solution that's going to actually improve their life. So it's not necessarily taking the lemons and turning it into lemonade. It's offering them a better flavor of lemonade. And it's in some situations that can be really difficult, especially when we're talking about Social Security and somebody who's receiving those Social Security payments. But when we talk about, for example, the healthcare, when we talk about, the proposed Medicare for all, we don't want to take, we can't tell them we want to take Medicare away and now they're not going to have anything. We have to tell them, no, we're going to give you a better system that is privatized, that is better, that costs you less. And when people understand Medicare isn't free, you're paying for it every month in your paycheck, every other week in your paycheck, you're paying for Medicare. It's not free. But in this other system, when you pay for that cash, you're going to save a lot of money. And that's the sales pitch. We have to give them, when a dog is chewing on a bone, you don't take the bone away from the dog. You give them a better bone, and then they'll drop the first one. So that's what we have to do. And this really just comes down to marketing. How do you market libertarian solutions in a way that are going to be favorable to people who already are interested in all these other, bloated programs that the other politicians are selling?
Okay, Dan, working off that, when libertarians say privatization, that's a scary word to a lot of people, not just on the left, but on the right as well. Tucker Carlson is kind of been the forefront of this sort of anti-capitalist wing of the right that has been growing a lot. So there is very much an anti-free market, and I hate to use capitalism because that's a Marxist word, but anti-free market rhetoric. So I mean, a lot of the impression that people have comes straight out of like an '80s movie villain. What do you say to people that go, oh, privatization? You mean like RoboCop or I come
Right.
from the state that Blackwater is in. They actually call themselves something else now, but like you've heard of Blackwater. Well, their headquarters or whatever they call themselves now, I forget what they call themselves now, is in my state. And so when people go, oh, you mean like that? Uh, that's what people have been trained their minds to go to. Blackwater, Nestle, movie. Lex Luthor, like
Right.
that. So how do you explain that that's not what libertarians are about, and what
Right. Well,
sorry, let me repeat that real quick. And what the difference is between that perception and what the reality is.
right. So when we say private, we have to understand that we're talking about an organization that is not controlled by the government. Now, of course, any organization is really, to some degree, public. If you look at McDonald's, McDonald's is a private corporation, but at the same time, they're responsible to the public. If nobody likes their food and everyone stops buying their food, they go out of business. If they treat us with disrespect, they go out of business. And we see corporations doing this all the time. Like we saw, um, you know, uh, Nike might not be the best example, but they did have some setbacks when they partnered with Kaepernick because of his messaging, and they had to respond to the public. And of course, ultimately, the public got over that. There's Chick-fil-A and their positioning towards gay couples. There's all these public organizations, and when they come up with these when they get aggressive towards the public and they start causing harm to the public responds and they take the money away. We don't have that opportunity to do that with government. So when the government abuses you, when the government takes your rights away, it's not like you can just say, well, I'm not going to be your customer anymore. I'm going to take my dollars elsewhere. You can't do that. You are forced to pay their taxes and you are forced to buy their programs. So what privatization really does is it puts more power back in the hands of the individual to say, we don't want to support that. When you look at Blackwater, or like you said, whatever they're called now, we don't have that option because we're not paying them. Where are they getting that money? Ultimately, they are operating on taxpayer money. It's technically a private corporation, but it's part of the government. Everything they do is for the government. They are hired by the government with money that's stolen from us. So you can't look at that and use that as a realistic example of what a private organization does.
Okay, so next, moving from that to more economic issues. Now, one of Ron Paul's big things was auditing the Fed. So I don't want, so, well, ending the Fed, auditing the Fed is a means to end the Fed, of course. And I just, so based on that, how would you explain the problem with the Federal Reserve to Joe Public?
Well, I like to explain it as it's kind of like it's a scam. It's a game of three card Monte. Um, Supposedly we're borrowing money from them, but how does that work? The United States Mint, the United States Treasury owns the printing presses, the plates. They buy the paper, they pay for the ink, they pay for the employees, they pay for the electricity. They run the machines, they print the money, and somehow that's called borrowing from this other organization called the Federal Reserve. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, on paper, it kind of looks like it because they print up bonds and this is the three card Monte, right? We're going to create some paper over here and then some other paper over here. And in some ledger somewhere, it's going to look like we borrowed money from you and we're going to pay you interest for the rest of eternity. Realistically, we can look at the Federal Reserve. We can tell them, hey, we don't owe you anything. We're not going to pay you anything. We can default on that debt. And they have no case to sue the United States to collect on any money that's owed to them because they never lent anything of real value to the United States in the first place. It's all just smoke and mirrors. So ending the Fed absolutely is something we can do very quick, very easily. And as far as the economy and what it actually means to the economy, people think like, oh my God, that's going to tank the economy and everything's going to go crazy. No, it's not. The printing presses will operate exactly the same way they will, except you will just remove the word Federal Reserve and you can print all the same bills. Now, of course, we don't want to print more bills. What we want to do is we want to figure out, okay, first of all, how do we legalize competitive currencies? So there are organizations who have tried creating, like there's Liberty Dollar, Gold Money, and all these other organizations that have tried creating gold and silver backed currencies. And of course, there's cryptocurrency. And the government's always getting in the way and trying to shut these down. What we need to do is we need to allow those to thrive competitively. And if the United States is going to have its own currency, it really doesn't matter if it's backed by gold or if it is fiat, as long as people have the option and the opportunity to say, I don't want to deal in that currency because I don't trust that currency. And that's the most important thing. It would be nice if we could get the US dollar back on the gold standard, but the reality is we need to do an audit of our reserves in Fort Knox, which by a lot of conspiracy theories, because it hasn't been audited since the 70s, there is no gold there. So it would be impossible to go back to a gold standard. So, that's probably an even bigger problem than the Federal Reserve itself. But if we allow competitive currencies to the point where anyone is able to use any currency that they like, that really removes the issue or the threat of having one currency collapse and taking down the entire world economy with it.
And I will just add the interesting thing is they can pull some interesting financial tricks. I know this because I have accounts in my family. In the 70s, they actually did a tour of the Federal Reserve and they aired it on TV. And they went, "Look, guys, there's the gold. See, we told you we had the gold, but so what? Who does it belong to?" And
Right.
they could pull all sorts of financial tricks to basically say that 5 people own the same brick of gold and they don't know it. But that is part of the facade. But I don't know if you own any crypto. I unfortunately I have not gotten into it yet, but I'm sure you probably do. So one of the big excuse me, one of the big scare tactics now is to basically talk about China and the crypto market. It's like, oh, you can't trust crypto. The Chinese will just manipulate it and crash that too. So what do you say to someone to say, okay, we can't trust crypto either because, the Chinese are just going to wreck it?
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. But when you get rid of all these regulations that are in place, and we're already starting to see this. You see online wallets where you can store your crypto, and you can store 10 different types of crypto, and you can store your currency, and you can exchange your US dollars for different types of crypto, and you can have your US dollars in that account as if it were a bank. Um, but regulations are preventing you from storing different currencies. Of course, there's forex exchange accounts and things like that, but it's really, they make it really difficult for you to deal and store your money in different currencies. Um, if you get rid of all these regulations that are in place, you give people more freedom. And that's really what this is about. Because, I mean, look, let's be honest. A gold-backed currency, like how much trust can you put in that? Eventually, gold might go out of fashion, and now gold-backed currencies aren't worth anything anymore either. We don't know. We don't know if we start colonizing the moon or Mars or something, and all of a sudden gold is worthless because you can't lug it around between planets, and then everything goes to crypto. Who knows? Like this is the problem. Everything in life is a risk. We can mitigate our own risks, and we can follow industry leaders who are giving us opinions when we talk about banks and people who we trust to invest our money in different markets, and you get a financial advisor to manage your investments. That's our trust. And the government, who is terrible at managing money, they've got their own $24 trillion debt, which is a number that if you collected all the gold in the world, you couldn't pay off. And those people are supposed to be so smart, they're going to tell us which currency is the best one to use. That's nonsense. We have to reserve the freedom and the right to decide for ourselves what we think the best currency is. And when you do that, you're going to see a lot of markets pop up where you're going to put money into an account, and you might store it there in 3 or 4 different currencies because you're not sure which one is going to fail. But you've got 3 or 4 currencies there. So if one does fail, you don't lose everything. And that's really, the future that we should have, is the right to choose between those.
Okay, so let's talk. Let's go from economics to another hot button issue, immigration. Now, libertarians catch a lot of flack on the immigration issue. So, the moment you so let's what is your position on the whole immigration issue?
Sure. So I'm sitting in Mexico right now as we speak, and this is my campaign headquarters. So I don't hold a very high regard for imaginary lines drawn in the sand by these big governments.
So you're saying you're colluding with a foreign power?
I am the foreign power. Yeah, it's, I would love to live in a world where we don't have borders. I fly back and forth to the United States. I've flown to Uganda with a stop in Europe. And I've seen, what it's like to go in and out of security in different countries. And it's all a bunch of nonsense. It's more smoke and mirrors. And, really, what is it about? It's about money. They want to make sure you're not importing technology. When you go to Uganda, they don't really have big security checks. But they are checking to make sure you're not importing things, because they have sometimes 100% import taxes on goods. So many countries are like this. Think about the United States. When you come back for a trip, the main questions they always ask you: did you bring any cigars or liquor? Why? Because that's the stuff they tax the most, right? And they know you're not smuggling a car in your backpack. So this is really all about money and control over the economy. And I realize that there are certain problems. We can't just open the borders, especially in the United States, with all of the problems we have on the border with Mexico. But we have to understand that a lot of those problems are derived from government institutions. The war on drugs, the failed war on drugs, creates a lot of the violence and gangs and everything else. And all of the welfare programs that creates incentive for people to move across the borders and take advantage of a certain system. These are all the problems that are created by government that make it more difficult to open that border and allow the free flow of traffic of people to just enjoy their lives. And you have to realize, like, how many Native Americans live on this continent that before the United States government came along and put a border there, they were able to just travel north and south whenever they wanted without any kind of problem. So we have to realize that these problems are created by government, and let's fix those problems, and then we can move to a more open society.
Okay, so let's talk about I've actually heard some very I guess border hawks make the case that if you end the welfare state, even if you end the drug war, like the war on all the drugs, not just weed, that you'll still have violence at the border. You'll still have dangerous people coming into the country, and that's why we need the wall, and that's why we need checkpoints and all of this and this whole system. So what do you say in response to someone who says, okay, fine, you can abolish all that, but we'll still have violent people coming here wanting to do us harm, and that's why we need the wall, and it needs to be really, really big, and we need to have all of this, and we need a verify for employers and all this stuff. So what do you say to someone who makes that
Right.
case?
A lot of these fears are they're the result of propaganda. I mean, I've spent most of the last 2 years here in Mexico. I've seen a lot of what goes on. I haven't encountered any rapists or murderers. This really is all propaganda, and I've traced it back to a few different sources. We've got American tourism companies who don't want the tourist money to go to Mexico; they want it to go to Florida or California or Hawaii. You've got, it's insane. There's actually the tomato farmers of Florida are trying to push the U.S. to prevent importing tomatoes from Mexico because they want to sell more of their tomatoes, and Mexico that's where tomatoes come from. Um, Mexico's producing better tomatoes at a lower cost, and so people are more apt to buy them. And so, what do the American farmers do? Well, they just follow the government's lead and say, "Well, if only there were a law that would make people have to buy from us, we'd be doing better business." Instead of saying, "Okay, well, maybe we should pick a different crop." This is it's government force. It's tampering with the market. It's creating monopolies. So a lot of these problems, and you can look at the crime rates. The crime rates in most Mexican cities are lower than a lot of the cities in the United States, like especially when you look at Detroit and Chicago and some of these others, Washington D.C. It's really not that big of a fear. Now, here's the other thing. People talk about, people crossing over a border as if, if you allow people to move from one place to another, all of these really bad things are going to happen. You're not going to know who these people are that are coming into the country. Well, if you live in Texas and there are people coming in from New Mexico, do you know who all these people are? Is there a border checkpoint where you can track which people are going in? It really doesn't make any sense. If you look at the movement of people from one state to another, and you can say if you're worried about the crime rate in Washington, D.C., there's no border checkpoint between Washington, D.C. and Virginia either. So all the criminals from this high crime rate area of Washington, D.C. can freely just walk into Virginia, but they don't. Because market conditions and everything else. But we have to understand that most of these fears are not reality. They're driven by propaganda, and those propagandas, these ideas are usually driven by somebody who's looking to make a profit.
Okay, and so you would say someone is like, well, what if, so you have had arguments with people who live along the border and say, well, I've seen the violence, I've seen this and that and the other thing, and you would say, well, yes, there is violence, but the rate and the total rate and the total level of it has been exaggerated by opportunistic
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely. And the other thing is there's a city close to me here where some dead bodies turned up on public display like some of the cartels do, and with a nice little handwritten note that basically said, tourists, don't be afraid, these people were part of a cartel, and this is a fight between one cartel and the other. We have no interest in harming tourists. Of course, we want you to come here, we want you to visit, we want your money um, flowing into this tourist city. And don't be afraid. We're not here to attack civilians. So what's interesting is when you see a lot of these crimes that are happening, it's usually just gang on gang crimes and violence. So it's not like it's just some savage wild west where you're walking down the street and people are kidnapping you and kidnapping every single person that they find and holding them for ransom. That's just not the reality.
Okay, so we're getting close on time now, but I did want to. I mean, you can't talk about uh, running as a libertarian candidate for president without talking about foreign policy. Now, apparently, you can do that if you're a Democrat or Republican, but you can't do that as a libertarian. So let's talk about foreign policy.
All right.
What's your foreign policy?
Bring all the troops home. Every single one of them. We have no reason to have a single military base in another country. We should not be involved in any foreign conflict or occupation or anything else, especially not on the taxpayer's dime. I know personally a lot of people who see what's going on in other countries and they want to go there and help, and they do. And some of those people are, they get involved in protests. Some of them are doctors and they're going to provide free healthcare. there are so many different ways that we can help other countries with their conflicts, but we should not give our money to politicians and let them decide where, we're going to send our kids based on lies to get involved in foreign conflicts, because that's how we end up with war crimes, criminal wars that we shouldn't be fighting, and all these other problems and blowback and everything else that we see and deal with. The government needs to get out of that business. If we as individuals want to help defend other people in other countries, we absolutely have that right to go there on our own free will, with our own resources, to raise money and do whatever we want to voluntarily help those people. But it's not something the government should be involved in, because they don't always pick the right side.
And dovetailing off that, would you take the standard libertarian position in regards to foreign aid?
No foreign aid, yeah.
To all countries that ask for it?
Yeah, no foreign aid to any country. It's not our money to give. It's not our money. It's not the government's money to give.
Even countries that start with the letter I, like Indonesia.
Absolutely not. And
so even if the Indonesian lobby were to approach you, and you would be considered, and you would so how would you deal with the Indonesian lobby? Try not to get this thing kicked off YouTube. God, man, help me out here.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting question, and we have to understand that this, especially, am I not allowed to say the other I word? I was raised in a Jewish family, so I saw all of the Israeli propaganda and everything. And what's really interesting is, and I have friends who moved to Israel, and they're Israeli citizens now. What's really interesting is there's actually a movement within Israel that says the Israeli government is not permitted to exist under Jewish law. There's an entire movement around that, because the Jewish law is basically, you're not supposed to have a religious state, a government that's operated under the rules of, supposedly under the rules of the religion, because the religion has all of its laws, and that's supposed to be the religious law. But when you create a government and the government starts creating things like traffic laws, well, that's not in the original law of the religion. So what you have is a government that's running around pretending to be of this religion, but that's not what this government is. And they put the Star of David on their flag as if, yes, we are a government that represents this religion, but that's absolutely false. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's a government. It is a military. It uses force. It uses threats of violence. It creates taxes. It does all these criminal things that every government around the world does. And it should not be tolerated, and we should not be forced to contribute to that. What we should be looking at is, how do we get peaceful solutions to the Middle East so Israel can start de-escalating its conflicts and become a peaceful area again.
Okay, and based on what you just said, let's push that into the wider international scope. So when libertarians make the case for non-intervention, the interventionists always argue, oh, we want to retreat from the world. So what is your view on things such as NATO and GATT and the UN? And I'll just throw in the Paris Climate Accord, because they all work the same way. And how would you respond to someone that say we need these things because we need to work with the world to solve X crisis? And we can only do it within this framework. Yeah.
Right. I think these things are very important as far as coming together and having those conversations, and, for countries to be able to talk to other countries about problems that they have and looking for solutions that other countries might be able to offer. I mean, I've been to, Mexico, Uganda, Paris, China, like all of these places, and just just going there for a few days, you can learn so much about how they resolve certain issues, how they take care of certain societal problems. And I think having an open dialogue between all these countries and the leaders of all these countries, and not even just leaders, just people between these countries, Having that open dialogue is very, very important. But we can't start having these organizations that become what the federal government is, which originally was supposed to be somewhat of a treaty among states. And then it became this big, powerful government that is now issuing dictates for every single state underneath it. We don't want the UN to turn into that. We don't want a world government that's forcing everybody who lives in San Antonio or Los Angeles or New York to live by some laws that were created on the other side of the world. But we do want to have those open discussions, and we do want to exchange the ideas so that people can figure out what can work for them and how to best implement that at a local level.
Okay, so let me push back on that, and this is the reason why I added the Paris Climate Accord, because for the same reason that there are some people on the left that might be with you if you're talking about NATO and the UN, and we're already the old stories about UN so-called peacekeepers abusing young girls in Haiti is kind of bubbling to the surface again. This is actually an old story, but it's bubbling to the surface again. So lots of UN corruption stories. It seems everywhere they go, there's some kind of corruption. Thinking back to the old oil for food back from like '03. But to the Paris climate thing, the Paris Climate Accord, there was a lot of hubbub about that because the image was, if we back out of this accord, and I think we are still out of it, is that we don't care about the environment, we don't care about the world. You hate the birds, the bees, the trees, you want humanity to die. So what do you say to someone from that perspective who says, look, I care about the environment? What's the libertarian answer to that?
I think the most important thing to do is just to assure people that we do care about the environment and we do care about people and humanity and the world. We just have to get across the point that, buying into some massive corporate international governmental program is not the solution. It's going to result in us giving up our rights. It's not going to result in a cleaner world. The biggest polluters in the world are the governments of the world, especially the United States government. The government is not going to tell us how to make the world a better place, a cleaner place, reduce pollution. That's not where any of that comes from. If you look at the innovations that have been reducing pollution and creating a cleaner environment over the past, it's always been through private corporations and private interests and individuals who are interested in solving these problems. They innovate, they create, they come up with these ideas. How do we make the world cleaner? How do we pick up the plastic from the ocean? How do we filter exhaust emissions or create zero emission vehicles? These all come from individuals who want to innovate. It never comes from the government. All the government ever does is figure out, oh, well, if we tell people we're going to steal more money from them, we're going to create a new tax, they're just taking your money and your rights away. And they're not doing anything with that. They're not creating new technology. They're not going to make the world a cleaner place. All they're going to do is take more money out of your paycheck, which means when you have the choice between buying a dirty old gas engine-based car and a new electric car, you have less money, so you have to buy the gas car. They are not helping at all in that regard.
Okay, so I'm going to go. So last question here, because I know you've got to go, is when I talked to Behrman, he talked about that there are two timelines, one where he gets the LP nomination and one where he doesn't. And we've been asking this of all the candidates, so it's only right that we ask you, is there anyone out of the announced candidates running, and not just the 5 that we're doing for the AMA, but of all of the announced candidates and all of the candidates who might announce, is there anyone that you would go, I cannot support them?
Out of those who, let's see, I think there might be one or two. I'd really prefer not to mention their names at this point because I haven't heard enough to form that well of an opinion.
And that's
But I
it. Yeah,
think
yeah,
for
yeah.
the
That's fine.
okay,
Just to say that there are one or two of the people who have announced already.
who have announced, I think maybe there's one.
Okay.
But I think, for the most part, most of the candidates that we have are, are very solid. And actually, I guess I should take that back. There might be a couple more that I just don't know that well at all because I know a few have announced that I had the pleasure of speaking to personally yet.
Okay, but of the ones that have announced and you are somewhat familiar with your camp,
There's one that's like a maybe not. Yeah.
maybe not. There's at least one that's like you would consider not endorsing them.
Right.
Okay, okay, and that's fair enough that you admit, because we have had people say, well, it's this person, but most of the candidates thus far have decided to kind of take that route to say maybe there's one, but most have been pretty good. So okay, that was Dan Behrman, everyone. I'm sorry, Dan Taxation is Theft Behrman.
Thank you.
That is the name that's going to. I'm sure it will probably appear on the. I'm sure they're going to put it. I'm sure the party is going to put it on the big board in Austin next year, and it's going to appear that way in my ballot when I do the primary in North Carolina, when I
Awesome.
have to decide who to pick. So thank you, Dan, for coming. This has been real interesting. And next up is the last of the AMAs, and that's Adam Kokesh. So we hope you join us for. We hope you join us for that. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you.